রিভার্বটা কেটে দিন। রিভার্ব
Where's Maharaj, do you know? Where's Swamiji? I'll go see if I can find it. This is like really close.
There's a place I lived before my current residence for the last 12 years. Before that, I lived in a place that most San Franciscans didn't realize, don't realize, was Little Croatia. And it's a block of Davis Street downtown that used to be adjacent to what was the city's produce market. And Croatian merchants lived and ran the greenhouses on that block of downtown San Francisco. It was leveled as part of urban development when the market was replaced by the Embarcadero Center and the Golden Gate.
The Embarcadero Center. As a matter of fact, the Embarcadero Center is where they have the memorial to the veterans of
So the Little Croatia was there, but very few San Franciscans know that history.
And this, this corresponding history of the influence of being Croatians, radio organizers, Troy, this block of the
Oh, yes, Mike.
somehow my father got his
questions. You can ask. You can just stand up or put up your hands, and our volunteers will bring microphone to you. You can, if you want to put a general question, that's okay. Or if you want to specifically direct a question to one of the speakers, most welcome. Please, thank you.
Maharaj, I was asked a question during the break.
Oh, yeah, okay.
The question was about restraint and why I emphasized that restraint was important when I was trying to express a need for boldness and the like. And I was trying to explain that it's like having a car with your foot down on the accelerator and no brake. And that American freedoms would benefit from a countervailing effort to restrain oneself from doing harm, and that was essential to maturity and balance.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, for someone else?
You go ahead.
Oh, first of all, thank you all for such incredible talks. Oh, Richard, Richard, I have a question. When you stopped at the bridge and couldn't come in, what exactly were you feeling, or what were you afraid of, or what was that about that stopped you from crossing that bridge at that moment?
That moment was more about being overwhelmed than being afraid. My entire experience of Vedanta was through Swami Vivekananda's writings. And they struck something in me that I simply hadn't heard anywhere else. And I knew that there was much, much more than I could understand, because I would go back and read the same thing again and find more, and then do that again and find more. And there was a sense when I got to that bridge that this was just one of those moments where once you cross past that, then something is, you're leaving something else behind, right? And so it was, I don't know, I'm not quite sure how to describe it, but it was auspicious, I guess, is the best word. So.
This is a interesting question. What is the future of the theme, the future of Vedanta in America? And I'm wondering, to expand upon that, the question that has arisen in my mind this past week has to do with the division of the former nation of one India, the Indian subcontinent, into two nations in my lifetime. And I'm curious if all of you could perhaps give some illumination as to the sentiment of the people of the Indian subcontinent, who were once all Indians, now being viewed as separate in political terms, in perhaps religious terms, but in terms of their identity. For example, the evolution of identity that Bobby was talking about. How is this expressed and manifest in the whole Indian subcontinent? Do people see themselves as separate nations, separate entities, never to be joined, or is there still some unity, appreciating the divine from different perspectives? If you could perhaps illuminate that for me and us.
Well, okay. Well, I shall try to just one pointed statement. If you want to build a Hindu temple, it's far more easy to build a Hindu temple in America today than in Bangladesh or Pakistan. Used to be part of India till 1947. I think that's amply illustrated. Yeah. So, Vedanta, as I mentioned in this beginning, the highest definition of the highest spiritual definition of Hinduism is Vedanta, which means Vedanta. So Vedanta is related to Hinduism the way Saint Teresa of Avila's mysticism is related to Christianity. That's all. So it's the finest fruit of Hindu evolution. Now, it is so much accepted and respected and understood and admired all over the world, but it's far more easy to start a Vedanta center in America or in Europe or Australia today than in Pakistan, which used to be part of India till 1947, or even Bangladesh, which used to be part of Pakistan till 1971. So what does it mean? So if you look at India's history or the history of Indian subcontinent, only India remained a democracy, an active functioning democracy. With all its problems, still it is the largest active functioning democracy. It's understood and admired. The point is, because there is something within Hinduism which allows this to happen, and something which is absent in some traditions which won't allow this to happen, which is a different story which I don't want to elaborate right now. It's not within the scope of our discussion. So the point is, Vedanta is so universal, it is so much admired and understood, so that when I went to Brisbane 3 years ago, they were starting a food distribution, free food distribution campaign for the homeless people. The member of parliament of Brisbane, the municipal chairman, more like UK parliament, they all participated. And they were wearing the typical Indian dhoti in their own way and eating food with their hands. So I asked them, but don't you find it difficult to eat food with your hands? But they enjoy it. That cannot happen in many of the places which used to be part of India till 1947. That means Vedanta, it is not geographically or culturally limited to one area or one place. It is something universal. You can be a Vedantin without changing your religion. Or even if you have no religion, you can be Vedantin. Many of our wonderful devotees are Christians and Jews, even monks, and they continue to be Christians and Jews, not necessarily Hindus. They're wonderful Vedantis. That is the uniqueness of Vedanta.
I would like to take an approach to this that's enlarged from the geopolitical issues of a particular subcontinent, and that is that the democratic urge, the urge to participate together in government from the point of view of an American-born person, the framers of the U.S. Constitution understood that they were being asked to obey certain laws and certain politics and a certain geopolitical jurisdiction that they felt was untenable. They had to resist and start a new nation. They said that they were not doing it casually, but they were doing it by absolute necessity. And they pointed to providence. They pointed to their spiritual life as guiding them to do something that might cause them their own deaths, early deaths. So that was I was just thinking about how that informs how an American would view at the comings and goings of democracies in other countries around the world and also in this country, because our sense of the healthy inclusion and the sharing of wealth ebbs and flows. Now, America is a relatively affluent country in the world. It's often pointed out that there's growing dire poverty in the world and hunger. And there's a disconnect for us because we feel pretty affluent. Many of us feel well-fed, and we feel an ethical responsibility to share, and it doesn't seem to work that way. So the idea that the democracies are not fixed in stone becomes really compelling to American voices. And I've picked out something that I think describes that from Whitman. It's the way he starts his classic Leaves of Grass in Song of Myself. And he talks about the interconnectedness
and it's basically non-dual Advaita Vedanta. He writes, I celebrate myself, and what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. Have you reckoned 1,000 acres much? Have you reckoned the earth much? Have you practiced so long to learn to read? Have you felt so proud to get at the meaning of poems? Stop this day and night with me, and you shall possess the origin of all poems. You shall possess the good of the earth and sun. There are millions of suns left. You shall no longer take things at second or third hand, nor look through the eyes of the dead, nor feel on the specters and books. You shall not look through my eyes either, nor take things from me. You shall listen to all sides and filter them from yourself. So he's basically zooming out to the ultimate non-duality. So when we think about nations and how robust their democracies are, I like to see it in that light. I had to reckon the issues of identity through extinct languages and study things that are rarer and less surviving than even Sanskrit, and try to resurrect them for the purpose of non-ownership, just of reverence. And I've written operas about that. I studied Ladino language, which is Judeo-Espanol. In its Western variety, it was extinct. And I studied for 7 years and worked it into a libretto that's been performed several times. So I do care about the specifics, but I blur them into a universal love.
Richard, why don't you? The same question. He has something to say.
He can answer.
Yeah.
Well, this isn't something I'm well educated on, so I would say this: the fact of the partition. If we look at it from an American perspective, it's hard to understand. And one thing I have learned from listening to my fellow Vedantins of Indian background is just how close and painful the partition still is. That it is a national trauma. And to say that it should or should not have happened is almost beside the point. It's a horrible thing that happened, and whether it was inevitable or not, I don't know. But what I would say is that Vedanta looks for unity. It looks for union. How that plays out on a geopolitical scale is well beyond what I can really talk to, But division happens in the world, and so you can't just deny it or pretend it's not real on this level. If you're on this level, you have to accept that as real as well.
The issue for me is the dehumanization of the other, and that is a consequence post-colonially of how these boundaries are drawn. We see it in the Middle East as well. It's very painful. But what can we do about it? One of the things we can do about it is not see other people as opponents. It's not a matter of wishing it away, it's a reality. People who are not you are still human. People who are inclined to violence are still human. People with whom you disagree, and vehemently so, your dedication to a higher truth is more than your dedication to a particular law or principle. It's one of the first things you discover in the first week of law school, that you could debate till the cows come home, and the truth will still evolve before your very eyes. You don't own it. You're dedicated to your best approach, your best vectors to it, which includes other people's vectors to it. So when it comes to coexistence with neighbors, I really don't take it lightly. I think that one of the great lessons of Vedanta is humility about your stance relative to other, well, everything, other people, other beings, other creatures in the entire world that we see, and even what we just infer or imagine. Like when we listen to music, you know, is it no good because it's somebody else's music who comes from a different culture? It might even be strike you as glorious, and yet we fight over land that we should be sharing, over time that we should be sharing. So that's I feel very strongly about that because I.
No, we can better switch over to something which is as far as way possible from politics and geography classes.
exactly.
Something closer to Vedanta, philosophy, spiritual life. This is platform necessarily meant for that.
Exactly.
So we can leave out all questions related to political crisis or political ideas.
But Maharaj,
Yeah,
I do
something you can.
Maharaj,
Let us listen.
I do think that America,
Yeah.
America is as Richard said.
Yeah.
As Richard said, I think America currently grapples with these issues
Yeah.
on a micro level, and I think what Vedanta offers us is the macro level.
Yeah.
And that the interplay of our sciences and our disciplines are useful in their full context,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that we don't look at it through just one lens.
Yeah, yeah. So Ramesh, you want to ask something, please?
So I think my question is, first of all, I would like to thank both of the speakers. They did a wonderful job in covering the ground in a way without any duplication, which was a
Sure, look.
remarkable thing because generally the same subject, when they talk, the duplication bound to happen, but this
They
was
approach from two different angles.
from different
and met
angles,
somewhere
yeah.
in the middle.
right? And they covered the entire ground that way, you know. But my question is this, that given this Vedanta being a newer concept in America, what do you think? Because there's so many other denominations or traditions and religions and all this, they have the same kind of concept and the principles about the truth and fearlessness and all those things. What will make this Vedanta as promote further, and how it will progress, or how do you envision future from their standpoint in that respect?
May I?
Yeah, please,
All right.
please. Say.
Well, you're right. I mean, the question of faith is faith in what? And the faith can be in one path or another. Of course, the Rig Veda says truth is one, sages call it by different names. What Vedanta has to offer that's kind of special is it's the way my own 98-year-old mother put it. She says, I don't care if you cross your chest like a sign of a cross, and I don't care if you cross your legs like in yoga, as long as you don't cross me. And I think that there is a higher principle there of keeping love in your heart and respect for your fellow human beings, especially your mother. I don't mean to say that mother worship rules all. For me, and you know, this is a lively subject amongst Vedantins. For me, it's the non-dualism, you know. But some people are very focused on mother worship and devotional aspects. And, you know, I have that going on too, of course. Otherwise, I wouldn't be respectful of my own mother and everybody else. I mean, I think a poet has to have that love in the heart. But I think the non-duality comes into play through Sri Ramakrishna's example, who deeply explored various faith traditions from a universal point of view. And I think a lot of us are curious about other faith traditions. If you're Christian, for example, you're curious about Jesus' birth religion. If you're Jewish, you're curious about Christ's interpretation of that. And obviously, there are a number of Americans who are completely fascinated with Buddhism and yoga. So I think the universality that Vedanta represents is maybe particularly compelling to an increasingly multicultural America and world.
I think that's what Morris covered, that non-dualism is also
Yeah,
universalism.
yeah.
So that's a good.
In fact, non-dualism has two important elements which are very relevant to our times. One is universality and again humanism. So humanism built upon spirituality. I mean the idea that humanity is one and the entire creation is one spiritual family. So that's the essence of non-dualism. So I think it's again it's part of the natural urge for something universal, something which is not limited to one geographical or cultural identity, something that transcends and goes beyond all lines of demarcation, cultural, geographical, or anthropological. And that's the essence of non-dualism, really speaking. Humanism and universalism, but based on the fundamental human compassion. I can quote something from Shankaracharya. He says, you can't hate anyone, you cannot hurt anyone because you don't want to hurt yourself. So the classical example is, if you hit your own head with your own right hand, you are going to feel the pain. So there is this total absence of otherness. That is the essence. Now, as I may, why Vivekananda was so much celebrated and admired in the Parliament of Religion? In fact, his was the only voice which spoke about this fundamental spiritual unity and oneness of existence. So that's something very unique. Now, they were not Hindus or Buddhists or mystics. They were not followers of Christian mysticism. They were all ordinary Americans. Many of them did not have any affiliation to any traditional church or anything. But the natural urge for something universal, that's what made them admire Vivekananda. He himself pointed out this, and in one of his letters to Swami Ramakrishna Sashi Maharaj, he explains why he did not project Sri Ramakrishna, but rather projected the universal ideal of Vedanta, and then brought Sri Ramakrishna later as an embodiment of this universalism. Because there was he found in America, again thanks to the transcendentalist movement, which opened the doors and made the landscape ready for accepting Vivekananda, listening to him. So this urge for something universal and also humanistic. That's what we find. Yeah.
You want me to also respond? There are many ways of thinking of Vedanta, right? And one question that Westerners often have is this a religion, right? We don't have that one God. We don't have that sort of set of moral codes that we are, these things are left to our birth religions often, or the religions that we follow. So, for some, Vedanta is a religion, and it is inextricably linked to Hinduism. It is a product of Hinduism. It is the source of Hinduism. But one thing that strikes me is that this knowledge itself says that the Vedas aren't the end of the story, right? Everybody is trying to talk about this one thing. When I was young, I was very devoutly Christian, and I became dissatisfied with it, and I rebelled against it, and then I found Buddhism. I found the Dhammapada, and I made a horrible mess of that too, because I was not humble about it. I wouldn't take a teacher. I just thought I could figure it all out up here and think myself to it. And Vedanta helped me understand both Christianity and Buddhism, and to sort of reclaim that message. But the other side of it is if I had rejected Christianity and stumbled upon Vedanta at the time instead of Buddhism, I probably would have made a mess of Vedanta and ended up a Buddhist, right? You know, it's sort of, it's all the same message. It's all pointing to the same thing. You know, yeah. You know, I had my flirtations with Sufism and all these other things, and you know, or Russian Orthodoxy and various traditions and so on and so forth. Right. The only thing that Vedanta has different than all those other traditions is that universality. And once you have that, then you can more freely move between these. There's something more real about interfaith when it comes from within.
I want to add that the Jewish tapestry of the world includes mystic elements that are quite universal, which is the one I come from. So everything's holy. There's a prayer for everything all the time. There's no strict identity about being tribal about it. Everybody's in it. It's all infinite. Holy, 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 everywhere, everywhere, everything holy. So this is the Judaism I grew up with. What Vedanta has permitted me is to be fully expressed in that way, with a contextual platform that has already established the universality of that as a well explicated dominant strain of spirituality that's even more ancient than the Jewish sages. But this is the universality that was mother's milk to me. I was taught this on my grandfather's knee, the Pir Kapot, the sayings of the sages. And so that is an element of Judaism that I think actually finds its expression in Christianity as well. And this is a predominantly, still, or at least when I was growing up, a predominantly Christian nation, now fortunately not as monocultural as it once was. So Vedanta was, let's just say, my version of Providence also, quite empowering.
Very good. Thank you.
I will tell you something interesting. You know, in the Ramakrishna order, there are monks and nuns. Sorry, no nuns. Nuns, suicide nuns. The Ramakrishna order, there are monks who are by birth, of course, Jewish or Christian or even Muslim, but they continue to be what they were without changing religion. In fact, that was what fascinated Americans when Swami Trunadidananda came to San Francisco. He, in one of the cornerstone letters which he himself wrote with his hands, he stated some of his early listeners put a question to him, should we become Hindus? He said, no. You should become genuine Christians. Mm-hmm. You should be more regular in going to churches and your own prayer sessions. That was the instruction that came from the Swami who founded the old temple, built the old temple. That was the fascinating thing. This totally non-evangelical. If you go to India and if I'm a Hindu, they are not particularly impressed. But in India itself, the missionaries are trying to convert, and they'll be very happy if you are ready to become a Christian. They're overjoyed. They'll give you money. They'll give you checks. They will build a home for you. Much more is true even with Islam and other Abrahamic religions, not Judaism, but these two religions. But if you go to India, this Swami Vedananda, our senior Swamiji here, he went to India for the first time, spent 4 months there, and he was traveling by train. And his fellow passengers won't let him pay money from his own pocket for the tea that he bought or the coffee he bought. Swami, you're a Swami. We won't let you pay. We will pay for you. And he was overwhelmed by people showing respect to him and all that, just because he's a monk. And they are not particularly impressed if an ordinary Christian becomes a Hindu. They are not bothered. But if you become a monk, that is something. That's true all over India. So this totally non-evangelical. They don't ask you to convert, and they're not particularly impressed if you convert. No, so that's what fascinates many Westerners. You know the reason why these people are flooding this ISKCON movement. They are not converted. They continue to be Christians and so on. See, go on jumping Hare Krishna they do. So they're totally non-evangelical. So that's an important, what do you call this,
Non-proselytizing.
non-proselytizing. They don't do proselytization. So that's what impresses many Westerners. I think, what do you, maybe you can pay your own
Well,
experience. when you went to India.
I'll say that's very true. In my personal case, I went to went to. I hope you don't mind me saying this. I went to Swami Tatmayanandaji in the early years, and I said, "Tell me about a timeline for initiation." He said, "You were bar mitzvah. You have you have a spiritual name. You have a mantra. You're good to go."
Yeah. So this non-proselytizing nature is what really impresses many Americans.
Yes.
So that's it.
Somebody there had a question. Yeah.
Thank you to all of the speakers. My question is about being out in nature and Vedanta. Richard, you spoke about how here in this country we don't have holy places like other countries. Though the people who lived in California for thousands of years, they had this connection to Yosemite and the redwoods and Mount Diablo. And I'm sure, based on your story, that Swami Vivekananda saw this when he came and he meditated here in the redwoods. And so I'm wondering, how do the teachings of Vedanta come out when you're in nature in particular? And what is the role of nature in any of your spiritual practices?
I can start if that's okay.
Please.
So, a couple of things. First, I think Ashokanandaji chose this place, and he chose certain parts of this place to make the meditation sites. My sense, and what I've heard from any number of other residents and visitors to Olima, is that there is something that was already there at those sites. He knew, right? He had that spiritual sense about things. And so it's wrong to say that we don't have any holy places, for sure. What I think I was trying to convey is that we've disregarded them, and we've made them profane. We've put parking lots across them, right? And one reason that Olima is, the Vedanta retreat is kept the way it is, where we keep the gate closed, we ask people not to use their phones, to just be here. When you're on retreat, you are here, is to keep it sacred. Clearly there is spiritual energy in all these places. And I think it is terribly, terribly important that I think this was my way in. I used to have a purely intellectual approach to things. That was kind of how I made sense of things, and I was quite sure that liberation was something I could think myself towards. You can't. It's not an intellectual realization. It is bigger than that. And what nature did for me, what solitude in nature did for me, was it forced me to realize that this is something that is more of a letting go. Not something I'm going to think myself to, but something I'm going to drop that's getting in the way. Something that happens to you when you let it. And nature is where I'm able to do that, and I think that's where many Americans are able to do it. So in that way, we can make our own holy places, you know.
I'd like to add that it's not for me, it's not a passive experience to be in nature. It's a very embodied, visceral, inclusive sense of being part of nature. And I mean it this way. When you listen to music, you're moved by the music. But when you make music, especially vocalizing, especially singing, you truly become music. You lose yourself, not just in the music, but as music. So similarly, when you come to a place like this, and the light or the lack of bright light blurs the vision, and you start to see an array of colors, an array of shapes, and yes, there are sounds in the background. You start to see things that aren't so discrete and aren't so material, and they become, in a way, without even thinking about it, without consciously experiencing it, a vehicle for liberation. So just being in nature can be very meditative. And there is an imaginative part as well. So it's about the breathing, but it's also about imagining what the land was like before anything was built on it. Imagining, imagining places when they were entirely natural before the footprint of humankind landed on it. And that's even before the earlier, what we think of as indigenous people started to put their footprint on the land. The land then becomes part of a natural world that's beyond the human senses. So that's one way to experience nature, I think, for me, at its fullest.
Yes, over here. Thank you so much. Here. My question, well, first of all, I want to thank you both for addressing the continuum of the East and West in terms of some of the Vedic knowledge that had come into this country up to present time. My question has to do with the continuum of humanism to transhumanism. Today, in terms of its gifts and challenges, so many of the language that's used in singularity is very similar to Indra's net and the web of life. And how do you see addressing just the vitality of being in nature and the induction into a post-digital world, especially for a generation that doesn't have the benefit of a lot of us that are actually for different generation? How do you see how to seduce and enliven and contain and sustain the future of Vedanta for that generation that's more in that environment? Definitely, this is something I've been thinking of for a long time, so thank you.
I will tell you the idea that the air and water, earth and sky, all these are sacred. We are only visitors to this planet. We are not owners of this planet. We are guests in this planet, not owners, not intruders. This is a central idea that you find in many of the Vedic suktas, means hymns. Prithvi Suktam, Bhumi Suktam, it's all means, Sukta means hymn, a long poetical work, which deifies, which elevates Mother Earth to the status of the Divine Mother. This is an interesting, for example, Dev Shanti, Antariksham Shanti, Prithvi Shanti, Oshadaya Shanti, Vanaspadaya Shanti. Shanti means peace. Let there be peace on earth, in the sky, in the oceans, in waters, in rivers, in mountains, herbs, everywhere. And also in the hearts of all human beings. This kind of prayers are found in all Vedic scriptures, the early Vedic scriptures called Samhitas. So, and another interesting thing, there were no temples during the early Vedic period, maybe around 6000, 7000 BC. No temples. So, whenever a disciple approached a saint, a sage, a Vedic sage for spiritual instruction, the disciple would be asked to sit under a tree and meditate on the sacred, sanctified nature around him. This is the constant theme, meditation. So these huge temples were not built till around 2500, well, 500 BC, that means almost 2600 years ago. So many of these huge temples did not exist in India. Worshipping nature, but not pantheism, not even pantheism. Pantheism, it means equating nature with God. Pantheism means identifying a divine spirit within the nature as an indweller. So it was neither pantheism nor pantheism, but the idea that creation is one. Not only human beings or came throughout the early Vedic literature. So that's why Bhumi Sutta means Prithvi, Bhumi all means Mother Earth. So the Sanskrit word Prithvi can be used for calling your mother and also earth. So because the most sacred and intimate natural relationship that you can have is with your own mother. So Mother Earth is the most sacred figure in many of the ancient Vedic literature. This I wanted to mention. That's
If I can say, in terms of reaching this present generation, right? I used to teach in a college, and had both failures and successes with this. And in one class, I taught a survey on ethics, right? And so you start off with the Greeks, and this is one of those general education classes everybody had to get through, right? So they weren't necessarily thrilled to be there. But one of the first questions that you need to get them thinking about is there a universal basis for ethics, right? Is there a universal truth? Is there a universal good? Is there something like dignity, welfare, whatever it is? And so you try to get them to think about what a universal is. And many of them simply couldn't. And I was shocked. This wasn't Vedanta I was teaching, but it was something talking about these universals and what reality is about, right? And you would sort of try to get them to describe what is universal and why is it universal, and they'd say, well, I like it, And so you kept bouncing against that relativistic mindset. They just weren't ready to open up to it. But one thing, I struggled with this for quite a bit, and one thing I found is that a collaborative approach, getting them to think as a group, getting them to create as a group, to produce something as a group, had a kind of syncretic effect. And they would start to think past their own limitations a little bit. And they would see themselves as part of a collective, as some kind of greater unity. And then they were able to open up a little bit. But it's a very difficult question, and I don't know that there's a good answer offhand. So
I'll address the issue also, because it's very dear to my heart. I teach, in my free time, I teach poetry to sometimes young school kids, sometimes teenagers, sometimes young adults. And in many cases, they are not familiar with the act of creation or with the arts, and they're not all in it together. The relativistic thinking that Richard mentions is divisive and sometimes dehumanizing of other people. I mean, Whitman wrote about we sharing every atom, every thought that you have, I'm sharing. So I read that earlier, and I've written a lot of poetry about people, sharing experience. But one thing that happens in a classroom where people are imagining the world through their own intuition and creativity is that they actually do come together in ways that are universal and not so discrete. You spoke about a singularity, I think you're talking about non-binary and post-digital. You're talking about all those things. I guess I'll go for it. I did write some verses at a Vedanta retreat, and it has to do with the space between the atoms. It has to do with the space of existence itself. So there's more here than breath, eyes, or emotions beyond measure. On a clear night, the sea shines under one light. See it. Dive in.
Yeah. Is a question there first, then I guess. All right.
Okay.
We'll get to yours, sir.
I think I have a question similar to yours, but I had it framed differently. What if all the information that is in writing available fed into AI, and my form of transmission and receiving has been through people, and then through my own self-evaluation and experience. And I don't know, I look at 5-year-olds now, and I wonder what the world is going to be for them by the time they're 20 or 30, and wondering if their transmission is through some form of AI, and will AI think it and come to conclusions that might be bad interpretations or bad translations. Anyway, a lot of this is on my mind, and I just wanted to know what you all thought, because there's many ways to think of it.
Quick answer. Garbage in, garbage out. I mean, if I had gone to a genealogical database and asked that genealogical database, who am I, it would have given me the wrong answer. Because the database didn't have the right answer. So the issue is that these searchable databases contain accurate and inaccurate information, often without filter. And errors happen and have consequences. But one of the things that we have in the human life is, and we see this in the law all the time, we get a, I'll use the word blur again. You know, it's useful to blur points of view. The universality is the rich part. You know, the individual story, everybody's story is interesting. Everybody's story is relatively true, but not absolutely true. So the thing with AI is absolutely fascinating because in a way, it maximizes the utility of the database in the most materialistic terms and hits the limits of materialism because the utility is an illusion. As a matter of fact, it exposes the paucity of reliability of the materially experienced world. And I say that as the son of a computer pioneer. It's wonderful in that it exposes the limits of that problem in the same way that the threat of nuclear annihilation exposes the threat of violence in the world. I mean, we have to learn a new paradigm of peace and of even who is expressing the paradigm. These issues of meanness, of who is this I, who's asking the question and trying to answer the question. AI is very enlightening to me because it always struck me as, in a way, it's inevitable that these things get weaponized. And I think that this is one of the reasons I mentioned the PM of Britain saying that this is an existential crisis. Potentially it is. The question is, how are we going to manage that? And my answer, the I speaks here, my answer is that teaching humanism and teaching expansive approaches to seeking higher truths is the best that we can do. Every musician knows that their music is going to be imperfect. Every engineer builds in change orders to every bridge in every project. why can't the digital society have the same humility to do likewise?
There was one here, I think. Is he next? Oh, sorry. There's several more questions.
Well, thank you. So my question is to all three of you, and it has to do with the spiritual aspects, in that I have, as a member of California society over my entire lifetime, and background of liberal traditions, have become aware that there are many spiritual pathways that have come up that are new. So the Vedanta is a very ancient, very respected, very powerful, in a sense, tradition of the philosophy and the life as a unity, and is very, very important for anyone who's seeking spiritually. However, there are new spiritual truths that have come into our lives. Among them being the teachings of Baha'u'llah, who is the most recent prophet from God speaking to mankind. And he began his revelation in 1863, and he had more than 40 years of revealing scripture, which is, I guess you could say, lessons in life for our benefit. And how does Vedanta and things like the universal truths brought by the most recent messenger, how do they blend together? How is it that we can bring all of these pathways collectively together to create the new world? Because the world is being transformed by spiritual realities. And it's the spiritual truths need to be transmitted. And each time a messenger comes, along with the messenger is a renewal for all of mankind. But the renewal is all of the messengers of the past need to be included in our understanding and in our teaching. So Vedanta is clearly a part of this and clearly has a role to play. But we also need to have this embracing of all of the other spiritual traditional backgrounds and bringing them together to have a foundation for the unity of all of mankind, which is the essential imperative for the times we're living in now. So how would you see the role of Vedanta in relation to this?
I think that kind of is the role of Vedanta. So Swami Vivekananda gave a very famous lecture, I think it was in San Francisco, on the way to a universal spirituality. And in there he says that there are many scriptures. There's the Vedas, the Bible, the Quran. And there are many, many more yet to be written. Vedanta, as I said earlier, for me isn't so much a religion as a way of life, a way of thinking about things, something that has given me back many prophets, not just Sri Ramakrishna, not just Lord Krishna. It has reinvigorated every aspect of my respect for other traditions. So I would say that's one of the key focuses there. Ekam sat bahuda vipravadanti. Truth is one, the sages call it by many names.
I also agree, but I also want to say, in the Western tradition, you have the Old Testament, the New Testament, right? You have the Mosaic books and the rest of the Hebrew Bible, and you have the New Testament, the Christian Bible. So I was growing up thinking, well, how many more are there? Maybe there'll be a third, a fourth, a fifth, maybe more yet to be written. But I had no inclination to throw out the old ones. And then I read that at the time of Jesus, there were messiahs claiming to be the new Messiah on every corner. Apparently, a lot of preachers were saying, I'm the new Messiah. So Jesus was not necessarily, saying something that on its face looked very new. This started me down the path of thinking about relative truth versus absolute truth, and whether or not a single religious tradition had any claim to be the truth at the exception of others. So the idea that somebody says, I have found my way, is something that bears respect, that deserves respect. And that doesn't mean you throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, it's old, it's done, we're done with that. Its antiquity is a sign that it's not relevant anymore. Maybe its antiquity is a sign that it was the very pure message of spirituality to start with. And maybe some of the other things that come in later, maybe they add, maybe they don't. In the court of law, sometimes a contemporaneous record is considered more reliable than, oh, I think that's what happened looking back on it months ago. No, maybe in the first place was the fresh point of view that was not embellished by commentary and overlay, which sort of steers you back to the rishis of the ancient world. Having said that, though, I think that it is never good to disparage a new voice. It's never good to, I saw when I was in New York last, they had stenciled images of a fairly recent spiritual figure on the lamppost, graffiti, vandalism. And they had this guy, and I noticed that there was a temple nearby where they would study such a thing. And this was their new icon. And at first I was concerned, because first of all, it's public vandalism. And second of all, it seems a little fanatical. But then I realized, no, they're expressing their love, their version, their new interpretation, their enthusiasm. And I decided to take a more benign view of it, as though maybe I was one of the early Christian fathers hearing Jesus for the first time in a sea of wannabe Jesuses. So, enjoy.
So in this context, just a minute, in this context, I would like to say a few things. Though we should accept all teachers, all new prophets, all spiritual messengers, but there is one way, a simple spiritual common sense that we can apply to try to understand whether it's genuine or not. This is from Vivekananda. He says, if somebody tells you that this is something that I'm giving you, no one else can understand it, it's something that God specially gave me, my own thing, you can't get it, reject him. This is a statement from Vivekananda. So if somebody tells you, this is my spiritual experience, I have realized it, it's not for you, it's for no one else, and I have the exclusive monopoly of this truth, reject him outright. This is one. Another statement that Swamiji makes in Inspired Talks is, suppose you listen to a teacher or a new prophet or any new messenger, whoever may be, and if by listening to him or to her, you get agitated, you try to hate somebody, you become rather, the more you listen to him, the more you imbibe his or her teaching, you try to fight with others, you find fault with everyone. If it agitates you, reject him. So there is one simple common sense that you can apply to check whether a real spiritual teacher is real or not. That is, if the teaching makes you more serene, calm and quiet, more compassionate, more humane, a better human being, that is genuine. If it's the opposite, the result, it's pure toxic poison. Now, there's a simple test. And Vivekananda says, you see, he says this statement, if somebody claims to be a messenger and speaks total nonsense that agitates you, that makes you hate others, reject him outright. Then he quotes one statement from Vivekachudamani, Vishayam Vishavat Tyajavat, means reject it as if it is poison. So this is simple. You listen to Christ. You need not be a Christian to understand a little bit of Christ. You become, it's so humane. It's so fulfilling. Vedanta, if you are a Vedantin, if you are a Christian, you become a better Christian. You go home, you start reading more careful. You start reading Bible more carefully. You start reading the autobiography of Saint Teresa of Avila with greater sanctity and sacredness. That's what you do when you become a Vedanti. If you are a Buddhist, you read Dhammapada, you read Buddhist scriptures more with greater sincerity. Vedanta doesn't take you out of anything. It helps you to go deeper and deeper into whatever you are born into, whatever you believe in. So that's a real test whether it's genuine or not. That's the idea.
Swami used the word serene, and this may be the most important thing I share today. The Greek root of the word serene is connect.
Yeah.
So, if you want peace, if you want serenity, connect.
I guess this fell, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to continue the thread that started with the very first question for Richard, where you were asked about how you felt when you came to this place the first time on the outside of the Vivekananda Bridge after having read lots of Vivekananda's books. Well, now you've been here for 7 years, so there must have been some kind of transformation. So what I wanted to bring up was the meaning of those words in Vivekananda's books probably in this past 7 years has changed a lot to where you might have been thinking, oh my God, I had no clue what I was reading before.
Yes.
And that could happen several times. And to give like a very simple example, shanti or peace. To some people, peace just means ceasefire for the weekend so I can recover a little bit. Okay, and then a little bit better than that is, okay, the war is over. And a little bit better than that is, oh, I feel so relaxed this weekend. And a little bit better than that would be, there was another Bengali guru in India in the early 20th century. He was meditating in his room and writing, and the windows were open. And some monsoon came through, some really strong storm. And so his companion came, oh, I better close the windows so as not to disturb his meditation. The windows were wide open. She walked in, and the candle on the table in front of him that he was using to write for light, the flame did not even flicker from the wind howling outside. So that was a piece that not only was internal, but it extended external. Similar to that would have been Jesus walking on the water and calming the storm. So at each level, peace is a whole new meaning and a whole new expansion of power. And I can't resist, but the comment earlier about the baby in the bathwater. That's been around for so long. I think people have it backwards. Everybody's worried about throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Nobody's throwing out the bathwater. The poor baby is drowning in filthy water. So when you get like that, my example of the temporary ceasefire. Okay, when you think that's peace, and you realize, no, there's something more. The temporary ceasefire is bathwater. Toss it. Peace remains. That's the baby. And you can keep leveling up and leveling up. So my question is, can you talk a little bit about that leveling up to where you understand the same words you may have read 20 years ago and suddenly have an awakening and go, oh my God, I've never understood that before. And you can keep doing that. But if you can talk on that process.
Sure. That's more or less my definition of scripture is a book that meets you wherever you are in a given moment. Your reading of it will always change, not 3 or 4 times, but endlessly. So, yes, of course, when I go back to Vivekananda, it's hard for me to even see the things that I was looking at in 2006 or whenever it was, right? That's the measure of a universal truth hiding behind some words, right? Is that it peeks out from different words in different ways at different levels of maturity and different times. That's how the truth meets us where we are. And if we're sincere and we're earnest, we will always find something deeper in scripture, in Vivekananda's writings, in the world around us. That's the beauty of this tradition. 2 things that I want to point to. The bridge keeps coming up, and I think what that moment was for me was kind of that moment when I realized that somehow I had been brought to something I had been dreaming about, and it was real, right? That there was a physical place, right? That I was crossing this bridge to Vivekananda. But the moments that stick with you, that keep growing, you think you know, right? I've been coming here for much longer than 7 years. I've been the caretaker now for 7 years. But you think you know, and you carry it around with you. You wear it on your ego like a little flower on a lapel, and you think, okay, I'm a little bit elevated now. I'm a little bit more peaceful. I'm a little bit more this. I'm a little bit more wise, or something like that. And the spiritual path has a wonderful way of humbling you the moment you do that, right? You know, and so I have been reading about karma yoga in every fashion I could, in Gita, in Vivekananda, etc., so on and so forth. And there was a story I layered into that same passage about the bridge at the end, where one day I was out working with a monk, doing some karma yoga, and trying to get things done, right? And somehow there was just a moment where we were working with a chainsaw, and it suddenly became easier just watching him work without attachment, and realizing that this is, okay, now I understand the thing I've been reading about for years. And there was nothing said. There was no spiritual discussion per se going on, but at that moment, it became easier to do karma yoga because I understood from the inside a little bit just watching. And it became easier to be in the world because it felt like I suddenly didn't need to carry these 20 pounds of attachment around with me all the time. And so the little piece becomes a bigger piece. The little insight becomes a little bit bigger insight, which becomes a little wisdom. And it becomes something you can rely on. But to grow that peace, to grow that wisdom, to grow that equanimity, you need to practice, you know. And you have to read, and you have to think, and you have to be in the company of people who can teach you these things. You need holy company. But it's eminently practical if you're willing to do it, you know.
As a matter of curiosity, keeping curious is a good way to stay vital and alive and growing. Just because A is right doesn't mean B is wrong. That's what we're taught. B can also be right. We might be curious about B, even when we're firmly fixed on A. Just because A is right doesn't mean B and C might also be right, or at least partially right. There's no lock on being right. And so what I think is that wanting to know is essential, but thinking you already know is deadly.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
That's where the self-realization comes in, right?
This gentleman's been trying to ask something
Yeah.
for days.
Oh, yes.
Not close to the mouth. Okay. I thank you very much. I had a kind of a basic question on the concept of universal or universality. When you think about universal, kind of, from a scientific point of view, should we think about it as limited by space and time, or is it beyond space and time? And once you understand the concept of universal, you could also probably apply to many other concepts, like the concept of infinity, or maybe like Paramatma, kind of what we generally are born in.
Yeah. So this concept of universal in Vedanta, and I'm talking above my place on the ladder here, but
Just go ahead.
go ahead. There's a verse that this space, this time, this causation, this world that's spoken of in the Gita, especially in chapter 5. There's a line in the Purusha Sukta that explains the relationship, right? And it says that the universal permeates this entire world and extends 10 fingers beyond, right? It's often translated as 10 inches beyond, but atyatishtat dashangulam, right? The image that I always get is that it's holding this world, this space, this time, this causation in its hands, in its 10 fingers. So the universality is only universal if it's within, if it's permeating and if it's transcendent. But it's certainly only universal if it's here and it's now. So the goal for us has to be to see that absolute, that infinity, that God in each other. Once we've done that, right, there's something lets go a little bit, and this relative world doesn't bind us in the same way, you know. So it's a good question, but I've always loved that verse in the Purusha Suktam, the idea that this world is just one small part, and it's held in the hands of the divine.
You can read it, you can listen to it in the foundational text of Indian philosophy. There are 7-8 lectures on Purusha Suktam, which commentaries. Commentaries are read and explained and expounded. So anyway, by the way, the word universal applied to spiritual values or philosophy is different from the same word when applied to physics or different empirical sciences. It means universal in spiritual, applied to spiritual values means immanent, omnipresent and transcendental. So it has nothing to do with space or time or anything. It is just ever existing. It never came into existence because it always existed. And therefore it will always exist, it cannot cease to exist. So that's the meaning of the universal in Vedanta, in the realm of spiritual values, as opposed to its implication in empirical sciences. That's okay.
I was just going to say immanence is the crux of the matter, because and Swamiji never fails to add the word immanent, and without a sense of that spark within you, it's hard to see it anywhere else. In Christian terms, they say the kingdom of the divine is within you. So the immanence is a crucial matter. It's easy and glib to say, oh, it's beyond space and time, because that doesn't capture the full omnipresent, immanent reality. And that's just spiritual common sense in a way, because how could it be otherwise?
You wanted to ask something? You raised. Yeah, please.
I think she's next.
Oh, please. Okay. Please.
Go ahead.
So going along with previous questions about today's youth and kind of the direction America is going in, and Vedanta, and also echoing the kind of oneness, unity aspect of Vedanta, and refraining from demonizing the other and otherizing everyone else. I'm thinking about the moment we're in and the youth and the polarization and the emphasis on identities, right? So like whether it's where you are on the political spectrum, race, gender, ability, status, everything. And there seems to be this retreat into tribalism and identities and almost like a hungering for some sort of wholeness from that.
Yes.
And which seems to be the other side of the coin from the unity and like non-dualism. And I guess I wanted to ask like a two-part question is, do you see a way forward from that? And do you think it's almost the other side of the coin of searching for oneness is now a collapse into all the divisions?
Every musician, as I said earlier, knows the limits of the oneness. Every poet hits that limit really early on. I'm glad you were listening because you captured the point I was making exactly.
I'll just say one brief thing.
We will have just one, after this question is answered, we will have just one question, maybe maximum two, because already we have ended by 2:30, now past 3 o'clock. So we will have just a maximum of 2 more questions. That's okay. Yeah, thank you.
I'll answer with one sentence on this one. I think that often people, when they're looking for oneness, what they imagine it as is wholeness. They want to be restored to a kind of wholeness. And that's where this tribalism, that's where this accent on identity and so on and so forth meets Vedanta, I think, or the idea of unity and wholeness. People want to feel whole again, and everyone feels quite fragmented. And so we're looking for what makes us whole again. That was more than one sentence, but anyways. Okay.
So I'll keep the question really quick in interest of time. So today's theme was Vedanta in America. And I guess my question and context. So first the question is, what can Vedanta do more, say, proactively than reactive? So reactive means I'm seeking for this, I come here, rather than proactive, which is, the reason I'm asking this, like PhDs from Stanford, right? This is an amazing platform. Mental health, especially with the younger age, is a real challenge. You know, I'm hearing universal human, I'm hearing universal religion, I'm hearing an atheist can be practicing Vedanta. Like I heard so many things from the morning, but like when I say where is the proactiveness, or at least some guidance, meaning I don't see Vedanta in public school, I don't see Vedanta in any college. So if you can like just think where it will go 10 years in solving societal problem like mental health and all that good stuff.
There is an easy way for you to help us in implementing your own plan. Come to the Vedanta Society, be part of it, give your suggestions directly, and be a participant, not just a witness. So you can find many youngsters who are students or who are employed in different IT companies, doing different professional areas. They come here. All these volunteers, including the one who comes to you with the microphone in your hand, those who are sitting in the bookstore, even that old Dr. Card, 93-year-old, plus all the youngsters who are moving around, they're all volunteers. They are the ones who help us. They're the ones who really make these things happen here. It's like that you also join this team. And then you will be giving suggestions. You can come to Vedanta Society in 2323 Vallejo Street, San Francisco. Directly talk to me, give a suggestion. We'll be very happy to take your suggestions to and implement them as far as possible, so that you will be the ones who are joining us in making this thing happen. Okay? So this is the best way for you to be part of this. And see, this gentleman sitting here is 86-year-old. 24 hours only Vedanta, nothing else. He retired as one of the vice president of Wells Fargo. Only Vedanta. If he's not crazy, he's a brilliant man, a businessman, a CPA, and a tax attorney, many things together. But only Vedanta, nothing else. Like that, there is an aged version, 93, Dr. Card, an eminent doctor with Kaiser. Only Vedanta. And these youngsters, they're also employees, IT professionals. They're all the ones who cook, who serve food, and also plan all these events. This gentleman came here and he is now part of the Vedantic movement. Of course, he doesn't have any other job, doesn't need anyone. You're a student, maybe you're a professional, come and join. You'll find it's a wonderful place. This will help you to be a better student, to perform better in your academic career. If you're a teacher, you'll be a better teacher. And so there are many students, Stanford students. I've been teaching in Stanford almost 10 years. I taught. Every Sunday we used to go. We have a room. We used to have a room. Now we are doing it online. The students, professors, academics. So you are most welcome to join this team. Okay?
I forgot to mention that your question, along with all the other Swami's classes, are zoomed and broadcast and on YouTube.
Yeah, you can
including
put this
your question.
You can directly put these questions. See, sfvedanta.com is a website address. You find link every Sunday at 6 o'clock. We have a program, the foundational text of Indian philosophy. You can ask any question, most welcome. Okay? Please join. You can give your name, email address to the gentleman, Shashi Kiran, and he can send you all link everything. Just a matter of 1 second, he can do everything. Okay?
But we're not proselytizing.
No, we are actually answering the question actually. So I would request all of you to give your email address to Shashi Kiran or any other volunteer.
Or there's a mailing list.
He will send, it's a mailing list, he will send you links to our university, Stanford University class programs every Sunday, 6 p.m. online.
Soon you'll be singing the Vedanta men's choir.
And you'll be asking, Professor Bobby Coleman is the moderator. He's the one who directs the questions to different members who are attending the program. He has been attending for the last 13 years. Most welcome, all of you. Okay?
A woman had her hand up in the middle.
This fellow here has been asking. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Is it on? Okay. I'm a little bit confused about the calling Vedanta as a religion. You're mixing up Vedanta with. My understanding is most religions in the world stop at worship. They're given a physical God and a physical book, and then you just read the book, and for good measure, the clergy steps in the middle and says, I'm between you and the God, and I'll read the book and all that. But if you're finished with the worship, you go beyond that, which is Vedanta.
I agree.
And especially in Hinduism, because Krishna is actually quoting Vedanta in his in Gita. So that's my comment. Now, one question was about what Richard had mentioned, the status of the culture and life at present time. And I wonder if you connect that with Kali Yuga, if you have studied any of that. And the second question is regarding Shakespeare. To paraphrase Shakespeare, he said, the whole world is a stage and we are mere players. So how does that, to me, it connects with the Vedanta, what Vedanta is saying. This is all Maya, and I wonder if you comment on that.
Well, okay, that's all. Okay, I'll try. So, Kali Yuga is, for those not familiar with the term, it's the age of this Iron Age, as the world is in a kind of decay and collapse, and it's very easy to see how that might fit what we're going through. Whether how to relate that to American culture, I don't know, but it seems that
It's worldwide.
Yeah, it's worldwide, but that's not something I really know how to talk to. There's obvious decay, there's obvious decline, there's obvious collapse going on. There are all kinds of future events or trends that are extremely worrisome. Whether this is Kali Yuga, whether we call it something else, Vedanta is helpful to make sense of it. So I would leave it at that, I think.
I think one more question. No, okay, thank you. We'll conclude. Okay, last question, please. Last question.
Thank you.
Oh.
Sorry. sorry.
Last question, please.
Okay, here's my question. But I'm going to start with the fact that I'm an American-grown Vedantist.
Fine.
I met Swami Ashokananda when I was 14.
Yeah.
My goodness.
And he said to me at that time, very much in this tradition, you don't have to become a Vedantist, you just be a good Catholic.
Yep.
And my reaction was, no, this is what I want.
Yeah.
I want Vedanta. And this attitude of the universality of Vedanta and Advaita Vedanta has really served me well. I've done some interfaith work, and I'm like a chameleon because of it. You know, I was at one organization that said, "Well, Sally, you can do this work with us, but you have to be a Christian." And then they said, "But you're not a Christian." And I said, "No, I'm a Vedantist," or I'd say a Hindu. And they'd say, "But you're one of us." And it's because of this this value of being able to be like a chameleon. But here's some of the crux of it. I'm such a good chameleon that I can give so much praise to all the other religions. But what about Sri Ramakrishna? I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, that's my, beloved Ishta.
Yeah.
And yet this doesn't seem to be part of the conversation that we are somehow allowed. And I don't mean to say that in that way, but it's just like that. I don't talk about that part. Can you address how is the Sri Ramakrishna going to be part of the future and the way that you present Vedanta?
Sri Ramakrishna explored the other traditions very much in the heart, every other tradition. He didn't see them as separate from what he was experiencing.
I don't think we need to shy away from Sri Ramakrishna in the slightest, quite the opposite. The stories are straightforward and beautiful and simple, and they take these incredibly complex or sublime ideas and make them immediately accessible.
Yeah.
He is my Ishta as well. So we do not step away from him here.
And I can say that being involved in Vedanta, I'm 77 now, so it's been a long haul, that the devotional bhakta side of Vedanta has come from really seeing a lot of the Indian devotees.
Yes.
And how, they come to the altar and the way that they prostrate, and that there's that devotional aspect. So I'm just curious about how this I think I have maybe mistakenly separated the jnana, the universal, the Advaita, and I've been told by Swamis, you don't have the ability to be a jnana. You have to be you are devotional by nature. So it's that tension I'm wondering about, and how Sri Ramakrishna will play into that.
Devotion and Advaita are different only in terms of, before you reach your goal. As means they are different. When you reach the goal, they are the same. So as a goal, is the same. When you reach the highest peak of your devotional life, you reach the same spiritual state which is reached by those who follow the non-dualistic Advaita path. This is a statement from the greatest of Advaitin, Shankaracharya himself. The 13th chapter, 10 to 11th verse, you find the highest devotion and the highest Advaita are the same.
Yes.
But your temperament may be the temperament of a devotee, so in the path of devotion may be more appealing to you. Another person may be more inclined to, let us say, philosophy, philosophical analysis, analytical thinking. Maybe Advaita is more appealing to you. But when you reach your highest goal, your destination, you reach the same point.
And
that's what Sri Ramakrishna himself says.
And don't let hierarchies tell you who you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it appeals that they should be following Ramakrishna because it's easier to get there.
Yeah.
So they follow them, follow
right.
Ramakrishna. So it's not like, the dualism or anything. It is just whatever way the easy. And Sri Ramakrishna also used to ask his disciples that whenever they wanted to do some initiation or some instructions, he said, so are you dualist or non-dualist? And he will give the instructions accordingly. So he was both and he was everything on that. So I think to me, there is no separation, or it's not a denomination and religion that we have a image worship or anything like that. It is just whatever way when you follow the best example to reach there.
Thank you. So just a few words. Now we are concluding our session. Thank you to the speakers, and thank you. More thanks, more gratitude to those who put the questions and made the session so alive, so lively. Now we will have just 5 minutes of meditation, then we disperse with a chant. Okay.